70 on all four parts you pass. It doesn't matter if you make a 90 on all four parts you pass. So don't get so caught up in 70 is what we need. That's passing. If we do 90s, that's great. I mean, that's it. It's better, but all we got to have is 70. And we get through those. So we'll kind of progress. I like doing it this way because we build on it. We stay on task. One thing I found is that when a lot of guys, when they'll take the class and they'll do it, 5 days, 1 week, and then they've got to wait 6 weeks before they take the test. They don't stay on task. Human nature is going to tell you that what you'll end up doing is wait till the last minute to study. So this way, by spreading it out, we just kind of stay on task right up until test time. There is a test the first Friday of every month in Mesquite, or right out by Mesquite Point area. I'll get you that information. I'll get you the information on how to sign up for it, if that's what you want to do. I would suggest you can sign up for it and you can postpone if you feel like you're not ready. But if your goal is to get an irrigator's license, I wouldn't put it off too long. I wouldn't take the class and then turn around and take it 6 months later. Try and keep it fresh. Try and keep it on your mind. And like I said, we will continue to work those hydraulics and do things, reviews, stuff like that, to keep everything fresh right up until test time. So if April the 3rd or 4th, April the 3rd is the first Friday in April. I think that's the test day. I'll confirm it. But we will probably have class up until like the Tuesday right before. That way it'll still be fresh on the minds. Because I want you going in and ready to take the test. So, be prepared to spend some time outside of class, studying, just reviewing, going over. Broken over and over repetition, not the best way. So we'll get through it. Let me give you. I sent out an original classmates and all that. They were pretty close for the most part. Had a couple of little conflicts, but. Nothing major, but this kind of lays out how we're going to cover the material, and tonight's going to be a little different. I was a little late in getting books ordered. I got a couple of books for y'all signed up early. I had your books. A couple of them I don't have, but I will have them for next week. I've got enough stuff to cover today that we don't need the books, so we'll pick up the books next week for sure. But I'll have them here for you. But tonight was just a lot kind of an introductory type stuff. We're going to go over terminology, rules, and regs, and probably be a short night, but we'll pick up next Tuesday the 4th. It'll be our second class. We'll probably do some of the stuff for tonight. We'll do backflow handouts tonight. We'll do charts tonight. We'll do stuff like that tonight. And we'll get into the book on Tuesday for sure. Then the next Tuesday, the 11th, it gets into some installation techniques, design. It starts going over next Tuesday with the components. I'll bring some product just to show you some stuff if you're not familiar with it. Some of you have done irrigation, some of you may not. I just want you to, I'm not going to bring everything, but there's some things, when we talk about, if you haven't done irrigation, we talk about spray head, the pop-up, the rotaries. I mean, there's a difference in what it is, and maybe seeing it will help you, as we talk about it, if you design with it, it may help you have a better grasp on what it is we're talking about. So I'll bring a little bit of stuff and we'll look over it, as far as the components. We'll talk about the design. We'll actually do a design. I've got a small scale design we'll work through it together. I'm not going to give it to you and say, hey, design this. I don't expect you to be that good. We'll work through it together. Probably take one class and get most of it knocked out. Then you'll see, as we get to like, the 13th of February, no, I didn't do a class on Valentine's Day, thank God. We're talking about design, we'll get into the state plan on the 18th of February, the 25th, which is another Tuesday, we'll start hydraulics. And from there, that on, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 4 more classes, maybe 5 more classes that will work hydraulics pretty heavy. We'll be building up to it, but once we get there, we'll probably do nothing on those nights with hydraulics. These are kind of the dates. Most of them are Tuesday. There's a Thursday here and there, but most of them are Tuesday. And it gets us, like we said, March 24th. If we want to meet March the 31st, that puts us to Tuesday before the Friday test. So it's a little drawn out, but I think you'll see that the information is probably a lot for a 1 full week class. So we'll work through this kind of schedule. I don't know where we're at with recovery. There's some exams in my book. In the book next week, you'll see that he's got his chapter. In the chapter, he has quizzes. And they're not really hard to multiple choice, but what it does, I think it gets you in the process of thinking along the lines of taking the test, answering questions. So they're good from that perspective. And we'll talk about some of the things in the book that maybe need to be written to them. I'm trying to talk loud because I feel like you can't hear me. But I feel like I'm yelling. Anyway, that's kind of the schedule we'll keep. Now, I know because it's 6 o'clock, we probably will start looking somewhere about 9:15 to break out. Might be a good stop there. I know some of you got your eyes and the habits and kind of what happens. So I don't want you out too terribly late. Understand that. I'm taking some classes in Dallas and had to drive home after a 9 o'clock finish, and it sucks. So we're trying to get you home. You got to get into work the next day. We'll get in here and knock it out. Now, if you need to bring something to eat, that's fine. Feel free. I like to cover the carpet or anything, so spill something, we'll clean it up if we want. But you can bring your food, whatever you need to. I know some of you are coming from work at 5. It may take you 30 minutes to get here, and not a lot of time to eat. So bring food, bring food, bring something to snack on or whatever. Restrooms are here at the end. Church doesn't mind, they allow us to use it. I pay them for the use of the facility, so I will say this about getting to and from class. Everybody familiar with Bullard? You been to Bullard much? Okay. Bullard is the training capital for podunk police officers. And if you don't think they will give you a ticket for the least little thing, think again. I've had a ticket for just about everything in the book. Going hunting one morning, 4:30, pulled up to the 4-way stop there in town. Turned right. I saw him sitting over there. I knew he was watching the 4-way. I made a complete stop. Turned right, got down here by the high school. What? The little snotty-nosed kid walked up and said, you know why I stopped you? I said, no. He said, you didn't use your blinker back there. I was in the turn lane. Well, we prefer you to use your blinker. I wanted to say, who besides me, you, and God didn't know that I didn't use my blinker? There was nobody out. But anyway, that's the mentality. So, complete stops, use your blinkers, don't speed. I've had people that have left class, and going home, I've seen them pulled over on the side of the road. I'm thinking, crap. Another one chalked up to the city of Bullard. So don't give them any more money. They're doing just fine. So watch watch the speed and everything. If you go back towards Athens, that 344, they sit up there by the cemetery. And they pull over. They got a new dark Suburban now. You can't see it, but if you know they're there, you can kind of catch a glimpse of them. So 35 miles an hour, and you'll be fine. But I don't want you going home with any trophies from your visit to Bullard. So if something comes up, we haven't had any winter, but if something does come up, if you're getting a little bad weather up there, just call me. You got my card, let me know, text me, whatever. If something major comes up that we can't have class, I'll do the same. I'll let you know. That's why I'll be sure that I got everybody's a good contact number on here for everybody. So.
Do you want our phone numbers, or are you okay with Erica's number?
I would probably put yours on here.
Okay.
That way it would be quicker. I know Erica lives out here somewhere, but if you don't mind, put a good number on there. I think everybody else. The rest of these, your numbers. What's yours, Tyler? All right. So that way we can just kind of make sure we don't. So, okay. Since we're going to kind of be in the same close quarters for the next 4 or 5 weeks, let's just kind of go around the room, introduce yourself, maybe who you work for, or what your thoughts are about irrigation while you're here, maybe what you're hoping to do, and maybe what your plans are. Colton, let's start with you since you're on the front row.
I am actually the irrigation guy
Okay.
where we work at NWP.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to further my education, actually get a certification out of it, and maybe a raise one day.
That's always a good thing. Okay. So have they just assigned that to you, or have you had any past experience?
Just with this company in the past probably 3 years or so, just repairs and small installations, just little stuff.
Okay.
I don't know, I couldn't take the test and pass it.
We'll get you there.
I know how it works for the most part, and I can repair, so I got a good start.
Okay.
I'm Lindsay. I work at NWP with him, and he's taught me anything and everything I know about irrigation so far. I hope to maybe one day open up my own business. We'll see how it
Okay.
goes.
Okay. Just irrigation or landscape and maybe some other
Possibly
stuff?
landscape and irrigation. I have no
Just
idea.
have to see what goes. Okay.
My name is Taylor. I'm losing my voice a little bit. I work for Cutting Edge, and I'm here to learn about irrigation so that I can get a raise and not get passed up by other people. And that's pretty much
How long have you
it.
been with Spencer?
About 7 months. Maybe.
Good. And
The opportunity.
he came through my class, golly, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess. He had a good job. I thought he he's just doing this kind of for kicks and grins, but he bailed off into it, quit his job, and went to work, and has done pretty good. So seems to be a pretty good guy. So it's good that he's letting you go through and get your license. Carlos?
Hey, my name is Carlos, and I got my own landscaping business for about 2 years now. So, what I hope to gain from this class is, to set up irrigation systems for my own landscaping. We do a lot of tree installations. Clients want a tree, but they can't have it. So that's what I want to help with.
I'm Janet. I'm a homemaker. My husband and I, we have a roofing company, and we're gonna add irrigation to it.
My name's Coulter. I work 2 jobs. Got Kings Country POA full time. It's just the community I live in. I do the maintenance there, and then I'm also trying to start my own business, Coach Lawn Care. Same spot, just staying in the community. So I'm just hoping the irrigation will improve and make me more money.
Irrigation's it's a good business. We've seen, when I was starting in it, there were a lot of guys that did nothing but irrigation. They did sprinklers, and that was it, sprinklers and drainage. They didn't do landscape. There were guys that did landscape and they didn't do any sprinklers, so there was always this camaraderie between, you have certain landscapers that would get certain irrigators to put the sprinklers in and this, that, and the other. And it worked real well for a while. Then a lot of the irrigators started getting into the landscape, or then the landscapers started getting into irrigation. So the industry has kind of blossomed a little bit. We've seen over the last 20 years or so where there's a lot of the diversity has become broader. There's a lot of other things that people tend to do, want to do, other than just irrigation. Irrigation back in the eighties, when I was doing it, come November 1st, there was no irrigation. They shut down, most of the guys went hunting, did this, that, or the other, maybe a little, service definitely there wasn't anything there, because everybody turned their systems off. And usually about February 15th, they start back up. That's why I told you I was working at a sporting goods store. November came around, I had to have Christmas jobs, I went to work selling sporting goods, and, boss came in one day and was, told me about another opportunity, but, that was typically the mentality. Now, we are seeing contractors that are looking for other opportunities to grow their business, to do more than just irrigation, because in any business, there's always some that are going to devalue the product. And irrigation's the same way. There are always some that, you look at it, you get your material list, and, a good hard day or two's labor is gonna cost you this, and the profits you wanna put into it is gonna be $3,000. There's somebody who come in and do it for $1,800. It's gonna happen, and there's no sense in competing with those kind of people. Let them have it. They're gonna work themselves out of the job. Irrigation's too hard a business to do for nothing. We ought to make money at it. And a lot of guys have looked at it from the standpoint, hey, there's other things I can do. In the meantime, pick the jobs I want to do, make the money I need to make, work for the people that really want me to come in and do what I do, and there's other things I can do, landscape. Some of them do maintenance. Some of them get in maintenance and then get irrigation, and get out of the maintenance and get into irrigation and landscape. So I mean, there's a lot of transition. Outdoor lighting, low voltage lighting, is becoming a bigger business. Safety, security, just aesthetics. A lot of irrigation guys, because they're already working outside in the flower beds and the grass. It's kind of a transition. A lot of guys are doing low voltage lighting. Don't have to have an electrician. Got an outlet, plug the transformer in, and install 12 volts. Nobody's going to get hurt, so there's no rules or regulations there as far as electrical code or anything like that. Drainage. Think about drainage. Drainage is a bitch. I mean, you're digging a trench 4 by 6. I mean, to get rid of water. Now, the thing I always say about drainage is that when people call you for drainage, they've got a problem. They just didn't get up one morning and say, oh, I want to put a drain in my yard. They've had water come up close to their house, or have had water in their house. And usually that drives the business. I mean, they will pay good money to get that problem resolved and not have it again. And drainage is usually pretty good money. It's intense. I mean, it's labor intensive, because you got to dig. There's a lot of hand digging going on with it. Sometimes you may have to get a mini X, but doing it and doing it right and solving the problem, you can make some pretty good money at it. Christmas lighting. I've had some of my guys get into Christmas lighting, and in 2 months' time, they can make what they would normally make in 3-4 months. It's a service. I mean, you can crawl around the house, put lights up, do the aesthetic thing, make it look good, blah, 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 take them down, store them, and that makes pretty good money in a time that's typically slow. Because still nowadays, November, December, January are still slow for irrigation, so people don't think about watering their yards, don't think about fixing stuff. So, people right now, they're still taking down Christmas lights, storing them, getting all that stuff done. So there's a lot of different things that you can do that go along with irrigation or outdoor work that you can build a business on. Now, one of the things I will tell you, kind of in the position that I hold, I have access to a lot of different things. A lot of different things that we do, as far as products, services. We can help you some of that. So, don't kind of feel like you're alone if you get out there and decide, well, let me check into this low voltage lighting. Hey, I need some help. I mean, nothing wrong with it. If it, selfishly, if we're selling product, that's what we're supposed to do. If y'all are buying the product, that's even better. And if y'all are putting it in and making money, hey, everybody wins. So part of what we do as a wholesaler distributor is help you with ways to grow your business. So in the future, keep that in mind when I've got a couple of guys that recently got into it, and right now they're really struggling because it's kind of slow. One of them's getting his Backflow license so he can test Backflow. You'll find out as you get into the industry a little bit more that backflows are required on certain things. They're required on commercial properties, and those backflows have to be inspected. Well, guess what? If you've got a license if you go through a class, get your license, and are certified to inspect backflows, you make a little money doing it. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of different things that you can do in order to make the business, grow and make the kind of money that you would like to make. I've got some guys that do very well at irrigation and, as far as the business end of it. The one thing I think that kind of hurts a lot of times is the guys get really good, they get trained, they do a good job with the irrigation. They're just not real good on the business end of things. A lot of times they think profit's a dirty word. Profit's not a dirty word. Not when you're the boss and you're trying to keep payroll going and pay taxes and all that kind of stuff. So don't be afraid to find out what it is you need to make. Find out what you need to charge and charge it. And sell yourself on the benefits of doing business with you, with your company, with what you have to offer. Sell yourself. A lot of contractors will. I had on the phone with one. We were sitting out here. He was telling me of one contractor that customer called him from out of town. He said, "Well, if we come over, it's $200 service charge just to come over and give you a bid. So, or we can Google Map it and we'll give you a bid. Be a Google Map." Did he do that? I don't know, but he did. Said the bid was extremely high. So number one, they probably weren't going to get the job. It was double what he had bid. He's pretty good at getting a good bid, but he went out and looked at the property, gave the bid based on what he saw, and so they pretty well priced themselves out. But sell yourself based on what you do and the services you offer, then don't be afraid to ask for the check. Used to when I was in there was a lot of billables. The guy's wife that I worked for, she stayed in the office and she sent statements out, boom, 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 all the time. Now with the way things are with the Square and all that kind of stuff, payment is a lot more easier to get. And one thing we found is that contractors that tend to get their money early on tend to get their money. They're not drug out, they're not strung out. So that's just part of that. Being a good business person, and once you do the job, don't be afraid to ask for your compensation. So, okay, so we're going to go to the schedule. Let me give you a list of a couple of things that might be helpful for class. Some more important than others, but. All right, a couple of things that are on here. Calculator. Now, I know a lot of you use your phones. It's all well and good, but when it comes to going to take the test, they will not let you use the phone. They'll make you put the phone in your truck or leave it at the back of the room. Apparently there were some unscrupulous people that decided to store information in their phones and try and bring it out during the test. Now, the people that give the test, it's Texas A&M, it's their extension service. They have a bunch of retired professors, I don't know, that they monitor the test. They don't know much about irrigation, but they monitor it. And so they kind of kind of watch out for stuff like that. So your phones will be off limits, at least inside the testing facility or at the test, tables. So I would suggest it doesn't have to be one of those TI 352s or whatever that, does square roots and calculus and all that kind of stuff. It's just gotta have numbers, addition, subtraction, that kind of stuff. And I would suggest get one that's got big numbers on it. Because what I found out when you're taking the test, everything tends to get really, really tight and things tend to shrink and pucker up and your eyes get kind of, squared up, and it just helps to have something you can kind of get a good look at. So get a calculator that's easy to read, easy to, the smaller the buttons, the harder it is to manipulate, and fat finger in the button and getting the wrong answer is not good. So I used to have one that was about twice the size of this that, you could see real well. So keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be expensive, don't spend a lot of money. Just get something that you can use and hopefully see and easy to read. And don't get one that makes a lot of bells and beeps and whistles, because you'll probably have some people at the test that might want to choke you out. So get just a simple calculator. Scales. If you're going to be in the irrigation industry, there are two types of scales. There's an architect and an engineer. The engineer is what we will use predominantly. If you want to go ahead and get you an architect, go ahead. But the engineer is the one that you will definitely need when we start doing design work, okay? And also for hydraulics. You can sit anywhere, but go ahead and Office Max, Office Depot, one of those places, a good place to get them. They usually put it on the shelf in the design section, and it'll say engineer.
A little more detail.
Architect, if you're doing a lot of, if you're taking a lot of plans that a landscape architect did, they will probably do it in that format. It's in fractions of an inch. The engineer is in so many feet per inch. 1 inch equals 10 feet. 1 inch equals 20 feet. It's
Simpler.
it's a lot simpler. Because you could take a regular, if you've got a plan and it says 1 inch equals 10 feet, you could take a regular ruler and every inch you know that that's 10 feet. It's a lot harder, but the engineer is the one that you will typically use. You won't really need this for the test, but you may think about it getting it later on. So engineer scale, just a funny looking triangle ruler. I would say if you've got a compass, fine. If not, it's something that you may need in the future. But basically, I'm not talking about one of those you had in grade school that, moved every time you tried to make a circle. That is a good engineer's compass. It helps draw circles, and it holds, because it's got a spreader bar right there. It helps hold the place, and it can be used in the design process. I would say don't go out and spend a lot of money on one. Just be aware that it's maybe something that you will need. You won't need it for the test. I will allow you to use it, show you how to use it. So if you don't want to spend the money on one right now, that's fine. Don't worry about it. But it is something that is a part of that design process and can be very helpful. But like I said, I will kind of show you some of the ropes. But if you've got one and want to bring it, please feel free to do. That way, you'll have it when we get to that point on the design. Highlighters, we're going to be looking at the book starting Tuesday. So bring a highlighter. We'll highlight some stuff. The way I do the book is I go over it really quick and tell you, hey, that's something you might want to, put down to something to put on a card to remember, to study. Because there's some things in there that are sure enough on the test. There's some things that have a good possibility to be on the test. If you can highlight them and then go back and make a study card or a study note or something, that'd be perfect. But highlighter would be good to have. Pencils, we get to the drawing process. Pencils are good. You can get mechanical or just good old number 2 pencils with a good sharp on them. The only problem with the mechanical is people tend to push down a little too hard. You start shooting little BBs out all over the place. That's the only bad thing about the mechanicals. So just keep in mind that, we'll need some pencils for drawing a straight edge. You can use your scale. Scale's not the greatest thing for a straight edge, but if you have a triangle that's a good straight edge, that'd be good to bring, and then an eraser. You will need an eraser, so, just make sure that you bring it, especially when we start drawing. That's gonna be the trick. Cause we're gonna mess up, we're gonna erase, we're gonna start over, and we'll go forward. Nothing wrong with that. There's a schedule in what we've just been talking about. Just some things to think about for the class and moving forward, moving on when it comes to after the class. Get you to put your information down there so I have it and I can get it turned in. Okay, let me also, manufacturer gives us these, so might as well pass them on. Design templates, got some, circles, triangles, squares, all that kind of stuff on there when we're doing the design. It helps make a nice, neat, figure rather than kind of freehanding it. I'm a little bit, anal when it comes to drawing. I don't grade you down or anything on neatness for the design. It seems to me that if you're gonna do a design and you're gonna turn it in for somebody to look at and approve to get a permit to put in a sprinkler, that you might want something that's legible, that's easy to read, that doesn't look like my 2-year-old grandson drew and put on the refrigerator. So we'll take a little time and make sure. Now, the good thing about the design process is there's some CAD things out there. Software people have developed years ago. It was really expensive. Now some of the software people have come up with design type software that is relatively inexpensive and cheap, almost to the point of like $1 a day, which is pretty decent, especially if you're getting the upgrades. The first design software I had back in the late 80s, I want to say it was $900. 6 months you had to update it, and it wasn't cheap to update it. So now they've got stuff out there that they send you the updates. You can even lease the software. So if you're busy in the summer months and you know that you're going to be doing a lot of designing, you may lease it for 90 days and spend $90 on it, and then let it go back during the winter months. So there's a lot of options out there now, and that makes the designing process easier. It makes it quicker. Once you get the hang of it, it cleans things up a little bit, but you still got to know the basics. You still got to know the ins and outs of, where do you put the heads? What size pipe do I use? How many gallons are going through there? All those little things, and that's what part of that design and hydraulic process is. That's part of what we'll work through. Okay. Any questions about the schedule? The stuff that we may need, as far as coming up, in the next 2 weeks, if you get that engineer scale and your eraser, just some of the minor stuff there. Don't go all wild, but if you get some of the minor stuff there when you start designing, that'd be good. So I guess by the 11th, probably when we start looking at it. So and that scale shouldn't cost you too much. So it's not like it's a whole lot of money out of pocket. So any questions about any of that?
How much is that test and speed?
Yes. Like I said, they offer it several other places. If you like to go to San Antonio, they offer it in San Antonio. But the one thing I will say about going out of town to take it is there's some distractions with that. The guy that I worked with They used to give it in Austin. It's the only place they gave it. The Red Line Inn on 35, North Austin. And you had to go down there, and that's where you had to take it. And there'd be a room of 400 people sitting there taking that test. And they usually give it once every other month. And he went down 6 times to take the test. It's not that he didn't know the material. He spent a lot of time on 6th Street. So like I said, there's some distractions depending on where you go. If you want to go and make a little mini vacation out of it, that's great. Get the test out of the way and then do your vacation. You know, go down there and get it knocked out. I'll be honest with you, I took the test 2 times. First time I took it, I came up short on the design process. Back in the day, we had to actually do a design. So we had 8 hours to do basically the 3 sections and then do a design. The design stuff for the test now is multiple choice. It's questions about design work. Hopefully the design that we do in class, the discussion that we have, will give you the information to come up with the principles behind design. You don't do a design, you do the design in class, you don't do it for the test. When I took it, you had to do a design for the test. So I did my design, and I did it based on the way that I had been taught by the guy I worked for. And he was conservative. He didn't stretch things. He kept things at a, so many gallons through a section, so much water, the certain size pipe, and did everything a certain way. And that's the way I put it in. I did it in 9 zones. And granted, keep in mind, you had 8 hours to do all these questions and then do a design. And I put it in, did the hydraulics on it, and I knew the guy that was in charge of the test because I worked for him as a branch of the company that he owned. And I went and asked him, I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, you did it in 9 zones. We wanted it done in 7. And I said, well, does it not work? He said, no, it works. I said, hydraulically it works. Yes, sir, it works. I said, okay. I said, so what's wrong with my 9 zones versus your 7 that you say it's got to be in? Granted, it may cost a little bit more, but I've got to sell it, and I know that it works, so I can sell it at that. Why can't that suffice? Well, you see the word economical. It had to be a well-designed, economical, hydraulically sound. It got me on economical. So the next time I went and took the test, it took everything I had to cram a whole lot of gallons into all those sections and make it work the way they wanted to. Nowadays, with the rules and regulations they have in place, it wouldn't fly because we can only run so many gallons through a certain size pipe. They were running like 1-inch pipe, you can run 16 gallons through it. Back then, it was like 24 gallons through that 1-inch pipe. So theoretically, mine would have worked better back then even, but anyway. So there's a lot of people that have taken it multiple times. It's okay. They've made it a little easier to get results because they've done it all multiple choice so that they can, grade it on Scantron rather than have to hand grade it. Results come back quicker. Usually in 30 days you have your results on how you did and, what you need to do moving forward, whether you need to go get your seal and turn in the paperwork or whether you need to, maybe sign up to retest. So our goal is to get through it the first time, one time, done type of deal. Now, when you sign up for the test, you will, I'm gonna make you a certificate. The way the state wants it done, you take the class, I give you your diploma, so to speak. You take all that information, you fill out the application, you put it in the computer. They do all of their little checks and balances, which they say may take them up to 60 days. And then they'll send you a notification that you can sign up for the test. Well, then you gotta go in and you gotta be signed up 2 weeks prior to the test, the date that you want. So you're looking at almost 90 days. One of the reasons we stretched mine out a little bit, I'll give you this information so you can start doing the process early. And we're still working on the class. And if you decide you wanna sign up, you don't have to wait on the state to come back to you in 60 days and say, oh yeah. And then you're 60 days away from, I just took the class to taking a test. So it keeps it all kind of close together. So I kind of circumvent the system a little bit, but I'll give you your certificate. There's things that you will have to go in and fill out, download into a file, send to the state with your testing fee and your licensing fee, and then they'll say, congratulations, they do a criminal background check. I've had a lot of people ask about that. I've had some people that were concerned enough about it that I had them contact the state and just say, hey, you know, am I gonna be able to test? The state never really said anything to us as instructors about what they were looking for. What I've gathered through some of the conversations that I've heard back from some of these guys, I had a guy that was, had a DWI. And I think he spent a little time in jail because of it, and he was all worried about it, and they weren't looking for that. That wasn't a big deal. Sign up, we're ready to go. I had one that was in the military and got in a bar fight, so he had an assault charge. Really wasn't a big deal. They let it go. So a lot of it is, I had one in my last class that spent a little time because of drugs, and I think he's gonna get to test this next test. So if you've got something on your record, you will have to turn in, when you do that packet to the state, you will have to turn in a criminal background information, and they'll check your history. What I tell people is, if there's something, put it down. I mean, don't try and hide it. If you try and hide it, they're probably gonna flag them, and then they're gonna check even harder. So if you've got something, put it down and let's address it and see what they say. I think what they're really looking at is people that, because they're giving you a license to go out and serve the public in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And if they say, hey, this is, you know, certified, got a license, you know, he's a plumber, he's an electrician, he's an irrigator, and they send a irreputable person into somebody's house that does harm to them, that's not good business for the state. So that's the kind of thing I think they're looking at, somebody that theft, armed robbery, sexual assault, stuff like that, is stuff that I think that they're trying to steer away from. And if you've got stuff 15, 20 years ago, they're probably going, he's done his time, he's good to go, you know. So if you got something, you know, ask me about it, we'll see what we need to do. We need to ask the state, we'll ask the state, but we'll get through that too. So that's kind of how the testing process will work. And like I said, I'll get you the test dates and get you that information. It's a little bit of a chore to do. It's a process. They all want it done on the computer now, kind of e-sign or whatever, and it makes it a little harder to navigate some of it. I don't know how good y'all are with computers. I've gotten better, but I still struggle at doing some things, and I've had some people say that it can be a little daunting to get through it. So I want to give you a little bit of time to start working through it, start getting your little packet together, so when you're ready to email it, you can do it. But you'll put the certificates, you'll put your background check, and you'll put it all in a little bundle, and then you'll download it and email it to them, and then they'll send you back, and they'll say, hey, congratulations, you can now sign up for the test, and then you go and sign up for a test date through Texas A&M Extension Service. So we'll kind of, I'll do my best to help you get through that. Not that I've done it, but I've had none of these guys that have done it that told me little tidbits about it. So, okay. Anything else about the test? Or?
How much is it usually?
To take the test, it's I believe it's $110 to take the test. No, yes. It's I'm sorry, it's $111 licensing fee. And it's $105 to take the test, so you've got to send them like $216. Part of it goes to Texas A&M, part of it goes to state. And the licensing fee, what it does is it covers your license. So what they're betting on is that you're going to get your license, and then you've paid your fee for the first 3 years. And your license is good for a 3-year period. In that 3-year period, you have to have 24 hours of continuing education, which is 8 hours a year, 1 day. Just, something related. They got a bunch of stuff that's approved. You can do some of it online. You can come see me for some of it, but you can come sit through the class again and do some of it if you want to. But you have to do 8 hours per year of continuing education for a total of 24 over the 3-year period. And then it's $111, you know, so you gotta get your licensing fee up front.
Wasn't there something with, child support, like if you had back child support?
Yeah, there was somebody, I think that they, somebody said that there was a little bit of an issue there, they had some or something, and they had to clear it up before, I think they would let them, and that's with a lot of stuff now, I think, even driver's license tagged on that, or,
And like register, like your tags and
Your
stuff?
registration.
Yeah.
so that may be something, I mean, but there again, it's all, you know, we can figure out how to work through it if we need to. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're gonna skip down to night 2, we're gonna talk about, backflow. Now, I told you backflow was one section of the test. There is roughly, out of the 4 sections, from what I'm understanding, there's less than 200 questions. Not too bad, does it? Most of the questions are multiple choice, they're fairly easy, they probably won't take you too terribly long. You get to the hydraulics, one of them may take you about 30-45 minutes to run through, do the little procedure, set up the formula, find the answer, but there's only like 4 or 5 of them on that section that are that long. I believe on the backflow section, there is about 25 questions in that one section. I'm gonna give you a handout, we're gonna go over it and discuss backflow, and if you go back and spend some time brushing up on it, going over it, memorizing it, I think it will be in your best interest to have you pass that section. I'll give you a lot of the questions. Feel pretty confident are on that test that are in that little book I could give you in a minute. So we'll do that. We'll talk about the charge, which is something you will need for the hydraulics as well as some other things, and should take us most of the rest of the evening. So let me pass these out. Does anybody need a highlighter? I've got some if we need them. Okay, let me get some highlighters too. Okay. All right. This little book was put out, it's been out a long time, it's put out by one of the manufacturers of our Backflow products. Backflow is something that is, you got one? Okay. I'm not gonna say near and dear to my heart, but it is, I am a licensed backflow inspector. It is something that keeps our drinking water clean. If you've ever been to a foreign country, a lot of times the water is not always guaranteed. I mean, if you've taken a trip and gone some places, they tell you not to drink the water. There's reasons for that. There may be, the purity of it may not be as good as what ours is. You'll notice that the cities, when you come into them, they'll have a little sign out there, public water supply approved. The TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, regulates water. They make sure that there's a certain amount of bromine and pyrene, whatever kind of junk they put in the water to make it good for human consumption, but they regulate it, and I'm on a little rural water company out here, and they send me a report every year, and I kind of glaze over as I look at it, not knowing what it all is, but I know that there's somebody watching over them, and the TCQ does that. Now, one of the things that your water purveyor does not want their water contaminated, because then you hear certain things like boiled water notice, and those things tend to, freak people out, and people start to throw lawsuits down. It's a mess. So a lot of water companies take very serious concerns and very serious measures to keep their water clean and purified for human consumption. They don't want some of the things that are in irrigation back in there. They don't want some of the things that are in medical facilities, restaurants, all these different places that tap into the water supply going back into the water. So backflow is the method in which a device or devices keep water from, once it's been dispersed through the meter, from getting back into the public drinking water. So you've got this network of pipes and, pumping system that move water to house to house to house. Once it goes through the meter to an individual business or house, the city, they don't want it back. It's yours, you do what you want to with it. And most of them want some type of guarantee that once it goes, it's not coming back. And with sprinklers, it's not considered a high hazard, but it's considered a concern. And because of that, they require that, most cities require that we put some type of backflow on the tie-in, the point to where we connect to their water supply to keep it safe, keep it secure. And this is what backflow is about. It's kind of come into its own. It's been around a long time, but here lately, when we hear things, down here in Jacksonville not too long ago, they went about 10 days, I think, with a little Craft Turney water company. They had some stuff in the water that it wasn't good. They've got some pallet companies down there that make pallets and treat wood and all that, and they got some chemicals in the water that some people got sick. And it was bad news for the water company, and once they found out where it was bad news for the people that were, didn't have it protected. So kind of got everybody on high alert. Corpus Christi, they've got all these refineries. There's been a number of instances down there where they've had boiled water notices and, don't drink the water type of stuff. And so pure water is we've got to have it in order to survive. And I think because of the fact that we've done such a good job in making sure there's no contaminations, it's even more critical because we can't even go to another country and drink the water in a different level of cleanliness and it not make us sick. So we may be over the top with it, but it is something that the state and nationally they take pretty serious. Now we'll highlight some things in here, so just kind of follow along with me. We'll talk about it, give you some examples. Some of it is important, some of it's not. But like I said, I can highlight about 30 things that will probably be good test questions. On the first page, Ian, it just kind of gives a brief history there on the right. There's two columns there on the right. It's a brief history of cross connection. The third paragraph down there, it says in 1929, not that that's really important, but just so you can kind of get a grasp as to when backflow actually started coming into play was a long time ago. 1929, there was a breakthrough, came when a device consisting of two check valves with a relief valve between them was successfully tested in Danville, Illinois. Now, as times have changed, there's been a lot more opportunity to pollute groundwater now than what used to be. So I don't know in what they were really worried about in 1929 as far as what they were trying to protect against, but the device that they created in 1929 is by far the best device that you could have in a backflow situation. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it, but it's just, to me, it's kind of ironic that they had it that far back, that somebody was really concerned about water quality and clarity and purity back in 1929 that they developed this device. The top of the next column over there, it talks about in the middle of that paragraph, you'll see the words, the Safe Drinking Water Act. You might just remember that. That was the act that kind of got all of this really started. Nobody really thought about taking care of water until President Ford signed it into, that act into place during his presidency. And most of you are probably young enough you don't remember President Ford, but it was a while back. So it was, I think, in the early 70s, somewhere in there, early to mid 70s, President Ford was the president. So that's when the the Safe Water Drinking Act, or Safe Drinking Water Act got put into play, and they started taking precautions into how do we protect it, how do we purify it, what do we need in it, what do we don't need in it. And there was a lot of, there was a lot of legal speak and legalese and all, all those
Probably
people.
before
that we
most of
covered
us
with.
in here.
Huh?
That's probably before most of us in here.
I remember him, but, I was still a youngster. On the third page in, you'll see, the question at the top of the page says, backflow, what is it? And that might help us get a grasp on what it is we're trying to protect against, if we can figure out what it is. There's some good test questions here. So let's look at it. The paragraph on the left. The second paragraph down, it says backflow is, and this is a test question and has been for 30, 40 years that I've had my license. It's the definition of what backflow is, and it tells us right there. So highlighted, backflow is the undesirable reversal of the flow of water or mixtures of water and other undesirable substance from any source. And it gives you kind of an example, such as used water, industrial fluids, gases, or any other substance other than the intended potable water into the distribution pipes of the potable water system. So basically, anything that is not considered and I don't know if you, potable, non-potable. If you ever been on a construction site, sitting there in traffic and they got the road blocked and they're running water trucks up and down the road, watering down, getting the dust down and all that. If you ever look at one of those trucks, it'll have stamped on there, non-potable. Non-potable is water that is not meant to drink. Don't do it. They probably backed that truck up to somebody's pond or creek, put a pump in it and pulled it out. It ain't water that you wanna drink. Probably get sick. Maybe not die, but you'll get sick. So, non-potable water is water that is not meant for human consumption. Potable water, on the other hand, is drinking water. That's what we're concerned with. So, backflow is anything that is being reintroduced that is considered an undesirable. It can be a gas, it can be another form of liquid, and it affects it in a lot of different ways. Some not so bad, some really bad. And it gets into some of those. Ways that backflow happen. The latter part of that second paragraph says there are two types of backflow conditions. Know the two types. And it's supposed to give them to us. They are back pressure and back siphonage. Back pressure is described in that next little segment there. So you can highlight it. It says back pressure. This occurs when the user system, so you got a city system, you got the city of Bullard, city of Tyler, whatever. It's got their system. It occurs when their system is at a higher pressure. It occurs when the homeowner or the business has pressure that is higher than what the city provides. It occurs when the user system is at a higher pressure than the supply water system, allowing undesirables to be pushed back in. So the city is required, the water purveyor is required to supply a certain number of gallons of water per minute at a certain amount of pressure, pounds per square inch. That's how water is measured, in gallonage for flow and in pounds per square inch, or PSI for pressure. So there's a minimum, and it's typically, I think that it's like 10 gallons a minute at 30 PSI. Is all they have to provide. Most cities, most water purveyors provide somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 PSI. So this is what's coming, because they put water in water towers. They have pump stations with wells that take this water that's been treated, and they pump it through the piping system throughout the city. And normally they have numerous wells or water towers. To get it there and to supply different sections of the city. But they have a certain amount of pressure. Let's say the city of Bullard has 85 pounds of pressure. If the user, whether it's First Baptist Church Bullard, whether it's my house or whatever, has pressure that exceeds that 85, guess what direction the water is going to go? It's going to go back. I I mean, water's gonna take the path of least resistance. You got 85 coming this way, and if you've got 90 going this way, it's going back. They don't want it back. Back pressure is a situation where the water has gone through the meter, the user side, the homeowner, the business, has for some reason created pressure that is higher than what's being supplied, and it's gonna push it back through. It's gonna force it back into the city water main, and that's not a good condition. He says there's some reasons that it's happening. So, user system is at a higher pressure than the supply water system, allowing undesirables to be pushed back into the potable water supply. Some causes are a booster pump, potable water system connectors for boilers. We don't have boilers down here, but up north, in order to create heat, they have boilers. Boilers create pressure. That pressure can get, you've heard of, whether you've watched, some old TV shows or whatever, those boilers can create a lot of pressure. A lot of times they would blow off steam, because they got to such high pressures. So that's one reason. Interconnections with other piping systems operating at higher pressures, or higher elevations. One of the reasons that a city puts water in a water tower, elevation creates pressure. Putting it at a height, water has weight. Gravity pulls on that water. Between gravity and the weight of that water being so many feet up, it creates pressure. Now, if you've got, let's say, a high-rise building in the middle of downtown Tyler, it's 70 stories tall. For every story, there is a lot of pressure. They have to actually use pumps sometimes to get it to the top. Well, just the sheer weight of that water at a certain height can have pressures higher than what the city provides, so we could actually start forcing water back in. So higher pressures on the user, the downstream side, pushing water back into the supply. Back pressure. Back pressure is water, and when water is being pushed. I remembered it because they both began with a B. Back pressure, water's being pushed. Okay? The other one is at the top of the right-hand side. It says back siphonage. This occurs when negative or reduced pressure exists in the supply piping, allowing undesirable substances to be drawn into the potable water supply. I always remember that as water was being sucked back into it. Back siphonage begins with an S, suck begins with an S, those two go together. A break in a water main. Y'all ever busted a pipe when you're out working on something and see what happens? Water rushes out of it pretty quick. And anything downstream is going to be drawn to that opening. It's going to try and get out of there. Water takes a path of least resistance, and it's going to try and rush out of there. So the pressure is going to reduce. If you ever come home from work and turn on the water and you get a bunch of spit and sputter and then maybe a little dirty water, cloudy water, and then it clears up, usually that's caused because there's been a break in the city main, or fire hydrant's been turned on, or something like that, dropping the pressure. If a subatmospheric pressure will suck water back into the city main. A lot of different ways. He talks about some here. Some causes are undersized supply piping, supply line breaks, reduced supply system pressure on the suction side of an online booster pump, or sudden upstream high demand. Fire hydrant being opened by the fire department, sucking water out to fight a fire. That's an upstream demand. An example of this is like the picture there at the top. You see the young man with a soda straw. He puts the straw in the soda, puts his lips on the straw, starts drawing a vacuum by basically sucking the air out of it, drawing the liquid up into his lips. That is a subatmospheric type setup. The same thing happens when you punch a hole in a city main, poke a hole in it, tear something up. Water is going to try and rush out of there because there is a reduction in the pressure surrounding it, and it will try and rush out. So back siphonage is when water is being sucked or drawn back into the city main. It says that the paragraph there at the bottom, it says there is one other very important term that must be understood before we can proceed. The term is cross connection. That term will be on the test, I can promise you that, along with back siphonage, back pressure, and the definition for backflow. A lot of those questions will be, what you'll get is you'll get the definition. The undesirable reversible flow of water in a public drinking water caused by such and such, such and such, and you've got to pick back pressure, back siphonage, back flow, back, so that's how they'll do a lot of the questions. So know them based on the definition and what word's tied to that definition. Cross connection is one that will show up. Cross connection is an actual or a potential place where the drinking water can be linked or tied to potentially contaminated water. When you think about it, where does that happen? You got a hose bib on the side of your house? I mean, there's drinking water's coming out of that. I mean, that is actually, for the most part, the water coming out of the hose spigot is good water. But when you tie a hose to it, what can happen? Anything. You drop it in the pool to fill it up. Little Johnny takes a leak in the pool while he's swimming. Oops, got something back in the water that doesn't need to be there. You take a hose-in spray product, like get home at Home Depot and Lowe's, and it's got little tablets in there for fertilizer, Miracle Grow or whatever, and you put it on there, and all of a sudden there's a reduction in the pressure on the city side, and it starts sucking that water back in there. Guess what? You've got fertilizer in the drinking water. That ain't good. So there's a lot of potential connections. A sprinkler system is a potential connection. As you cut into the house line, you've tied on put a T or whatever in there, and then you've got a line that goes to the sprinkler system. On the other side of that tie-in, you've got sprinkler heads. Those sprinkler heads are sitting below grade or at grade. What do we do in the grass? Put fertilizer on it, put weed killer, put ant killer. Little foo-foo goes out there and takes a dump. There's a lot of stuff out there in the grass that we don't really want back in our drinking water. So it's a cross connection is an actual or potential place that contamination could happen. So remember the term cross connection, and it's defined as an actual or potential connection between a potable water supply and any other source or system through which it is possible to introduce into that potable system any used gas, industrial fluid, other substance other than intended for human consumption. He does talk a little bit there in the bottom part of that about bypass arrangements and jumper connections, removable sections. Those are a lot of things that people will do, well-meaning people, but they'll do, and it allows for cross connections. One of the big ones is, we're blessed because we have a lot of lakes around East Texas. People will put in a pump system on a lake, but the lake may get into a drought situation and they don't want to lose their grass, so they want the sprinkler to run off the city water or the municipal water. So they make an arrangement to where they can turn a valve or flip a switch to where if the pumps, the water's too low for the pump to run, it will run through the sprinkler system, run through the city water. Well, if you make that connection and you've got the pump running and you've got a valve open, you could pump lake water back into the city water if you're not careful. That would be a back pressure situation. So jumpers, crossovers, stuff like that are not really recommended. If they are done, they need to be protected with a proper device. But well-meaning people do stuff like that, not thinking about the prospect of contamination. So cross connection is the potential or actual place where it can happen. Looking at the next page, we'll look at some cases, some scenarios, maybe help you have a little bit better idea about how backflow works and maybe why we're trying to keep it from happening. People say, does it really happen? Is it really necessary? Yeah. And the bad thing about it is backflow devices, because they're made out of metal, they're getting expensive. It's costly. But, you know, the possibility of having somebody sick or dead, is a lot worse. So, people, you know, a lot of people try and work around putting the backflow in, but it needs to be done. The first case was in 1933. It says people from all over the world were crowded into one of America's largest cities to see the World's Fair. Okay, I mean, big deal. An epidemic of amoebic dysentery broke out, and official records show that 98 people died, and 1,409 others became seriously ill. Hundreds, possibly thousands of others were affected, but never counted by investigating agencies, since they, when they became ill, they just went home and, you know, chalked it up to the cold or whatever. But in all actuality, it says a special investigation committee of public health authorities found the main reason for this catastrophe to be old and generally defective plumbing and cross connections, potentially permitting back siphonage, water being sucked back into the system from fixtures such as bathtubs and toilets. You think about that many people crowding into a small town, whether it was New Orleans or wherever, for the World's Fair, putting a tax on the plumbing, the sewage and all that, and not having any protection, and bath water, which, yeah, I mean, it's dirty water. Probably not gonna kill you. Probably don't wanna drink it either. But toilet water, don't think I wanna be drinking it. But if it gets sucked back in or drawn back in because there's not a protective device, it gets back into the city main, and then all of a sudden it's diluted and spread all over 60 square blocks. And then everybody's contaminated, hepatitis or whatever comes along with it. So that did happen in 1933. Oh, that's just one instance. No, there are plenty others. Number two, 1964. This one's interesting. It says a hospital in the state of Michigan had its potable water system contaminated. The cause was an undetected autopsy table in the hospital's morgue. Yum. I don't think that's something we want to be drinking. And, you know, those tables, I mean, they're just flushing, they're just cleaning, you know, and you get the debris and all that out of the way, so there's no telling what was in that autopsy table that got drawn back into the drinking water. So, you know, still, 1964 is probably early. They really hadn't thought about it. I mean, people got sick, maybe some died. They hadn't thought about how do we keep this from happening. Still, you know, President Ford's still probably winking his parents' eyes at this point. But, case number three, in 1955 in San Diego, California, a U.S. Navy destroyer pumped salt water through 5 obsolete check valves in the street mains, in the street mains in a 90 square block of the town. Now, salt water, and if you've ever been to the beach or whatever, got hit, knocked down by a wave, snout full of salt water, it's not real comfortable. It's not, you know, probably make you spit, gag, whatever. Probably not something you want to drink, especially if you've been out mowing the yard or whatever, come in, grab a bottle of, you know, some tap water, take a drink and have salt water. It's probably not really good, but it's probably not gonna kill you. But still, it's something that can be avoided if obsolete check valves were checked or if they were working or properly installed. Number 4 is a real case. It happened, it's happened multiple times. It happened in Dallas, other than in this instance, back in the 80s. This one I think was before that, in the 70s. It says an unusual death was caused by back siphonage in a suburb of one of California's largest cities. A man was spraying the lawn with a chemical weed killer that contained arsenic. His applicator was an aspiration device which was on the end of a garden hose. We've all seen those little things. That was the big deal back in the 70s and probably early 80s. When he had finished spraying, the man turned off the water hose, disconnected the applicator, and since it was a warm day, turned on the hose and again to get a drink of water. A short time later, he was found dead from arsenic poisoning. Apparently that aspiration device that, you know, where you put a little tablet or whatever in there, and it, you know, spins it out and goes out through the end as you're spraying it, it drew some back in that hose. He disconnected it, thinking everything was fine, turned on the water, took a big drink of water, he got a lot of arsenic with it. I don't think arsenic is something that we digest very well. It wasn't arsenic, but there was another compound that happened in Dallas. A kid was out his dad had done the same type of thing, had sprayed something, whether it was ant killer or poison or whatever. He came back in from running, went to the hose, took a drink of water, hit the ground. So there are, I mean, those are severe, but there are instances where that can happen. Number 5, in 1969, in Utah, raw irrigation water was pumped through a farm standby irrigation connection into over half of the entire town's potable water supply. So this farmer's got a tank, and tank's out there, the cows been wandering in it, getting drinks, doing whatever they do in the water, and he's pumping water out to go to the crops, which is, that water's fine for the crops, but because of the pump, and he probably had his city water tied into the system so he could water when the pond got low, the pump pumped water back into the city main, and they were drinking pond water, basically, is what it boiled down to. Because the connections weren't there, protection wasn't there. Okay, number 6, this was a real event. It happened at, not that they were gonna probably win the national title or anything, but Holy Cross football team. 1969, it said 83 football players, team members, and coaching staff were stricken with infectious hepatitis due to subsurface hose bibs and a nearby fire. The fire trucks and fighting the fire reduced the main pressure enough to cause back siphonage. Remember, water's being sucked back in from surrounding areas. They sucked water back in from these hose bibs. Now, the way I understand it, I wasn't there, but the way I understand it was there was a park nearby, Holy Cross, where the football team was practicing, doing their two-a-days, hot, how they used to really make them work back in the day when football was football. There's a park next door. The way the park watered its grounds was they had hose bibs, and they would run hoses out, turn the hose bibs on, let them water, take the hoses up, store them, keep them out of harm's way. And they were all in this vault. Well, there were some young men enjoying the day at the park somewhere in that instance, and the bathrooms were locked apparently, so they decided to leak into this submerged pit that had water in it, because I'm sure some of those hose bibs were leaking. So this pit had water in it, so they decided to leak in it as well. Well, the fire department turned on the fire hydrant, started using their pump trucks, drew water back in that pit into the drinking water. The Holy Cross football team's over there taking two-a-days and drinking water out of the same system, and they got infectious hepatitis because of it. So, number 7, in the summer of 1970 in New Jersey. Now, I know y'all don't remember these vending machines like this, do you? The dangest thing, you punch a button, the cup would drop down, they put the carbonated water in there, and then all of a sudden you see the syrup come in there, and you had a Coke, and mixed it right there in this little vending machine. In the summer of 1970 in New Jersey, a soft drink vending machine in the caddy house of the golf club was connected to the building heating system, in which hexavalent chromium had been added. 11 cases of nausea were reported by the caddies. Do any of you remember the movie with Julia Roberts, where she was the legal assistant? What's the name of that movie? Dadgummit, I just had it on the tip of my tongue.
Pretty Woman?
No.
Aaron Brockovich.
Aaron Brockovich. Remember that? She was a down-and-out mother, destitute. She was trying to make a living, beat up little old gremlin, I think, to work, and got this lawyer to hire because she was just over the top, and she started working this case, and she started going out to PG&E, which PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, is the ones that are on trouble now for the fires in California. But PG&E, in one of their plants in one part of California, was, in some of their processing, was pumping hexavalent chromium into the groundwater. The people in this town that Aaron Brockovich got this big lawsuit going against PG&E, where she became rich, and they made the movie after. She started investigating it, and in one spot she goes down at a well and gets a sample of water, and they run her off. The little one little girl, had cancer. I mean, she was about 11, 12 years old, she had cancer. A couple of the older women had, hysterectomies, and they linked it all to this chemical, hexavalent-chromium, that was being put into the groundwater by PG&E. I mean, they had millions of dollars, but that kind of stuff happens when you talk about contamination. That was just an instance, somebody saw a water line and said, oh, well, I'll just cut into here. It was a heating line, and it shouldn't have been, but it was pumping that chemical into the soft drink machine. And people were drinking that as a part of what was in their Coke. So all kinds of things can happen. We hear about people that dump oil, battery acid, all that kind of stuff into, just dump it out on the ground. Well, think about where that goes. The earth is a natural filter. Rain hits the ground. It used to be that the different stratas of the ground would filter the water as it got down to what they call the water table. Back in the olden days, you could drill a well, get into that water table, and 9 times out of 10, you could probably have pretty decent water. You got down far enough because it was filtered naturally. Well, nowadays you can't do that. There was a deal a few years, well, been 20 plus. There was a family kind of up in the Flint area before it really popped and started developing. They had rented a house. The house had a well on it. They were just drinking the water out of the well, using it for baths, dishes, and all that kind of stuff. Never had it tested. Come to find out, it was a polluted well because of some of the surrounding businesses or whatever, and the kids ended up getting sick. They couldn't figure out why they were missing so much school, started doing a lot of investigation, and found out that the well that they were drinking from was contaminated. Nobody ever thought about checking it, but now today, in today's society, a lot of the things we've got to think about is the groundwater being polluted because, yeah, the water is treated by the city, but if you go to where a lot of that comes from, it could be treated prior to it could be, in bad shape, having to be before it's even treated. Whereas in years past, it was actually okay to drink. So be aware that there's a lot of stuff being put into the atmosphere, put into the groundwater that could be polluting it. Spray hose in the sink. Back in the day, the janitor's closet. If you're the teacher's pet, you got to go clean erasers and whatnot, and a lot of times that took place in the janitor's closet. And janitor's closet was a great place to hide out. But the sink in a janitor's closet was usually one of those, had a big basin, and so that you could put, maybe put big stuff in it or whatever. A lot of times the janitors would take a hose and attach it to the spigot in the sink. And then they would take the hose, fill up their mop bucket, take the hose and wrap it back up in the sink. That is a no-no. Because the basin that you've got at the sink is designed so that water that has been come out of that spigot will go into the basin and be collected there, but can never be drawn back up into the spigot. But when you put a hose on it, you put that hose in that sink, you have bypassed that arrangement. They call it an air gap. You look at that sink over there, there is probably about a 6-inch difference from where that spigot is to where the top of the sink is. There ain't no way on God's green earth that water can jump from that basin back up into that spigot. That is the perfect backflow until you stick a hose on it, stick the hose down in the basin. A lot of what people do overrides some of the protective devices that have been put in play. But a type of cross connection is commonly found in the food industry and in the janitor's sink. The hose has been connected to the faucet on the sink. When the faucet is left running, or a loss in pressure on the supply main can siphon that used water back up into the hose and back up into the drinking water system. Submerged inlets. In many industrial installations, they have valves that fill tanks from the bottom. Typically, if they filled it from the top with a air gap, it wouldn't be an issue. But if they fill it from the bottom, if that valve leaks or whatever, to pressure the way the water can force water back through that valve. But submerged inlets is a way that cross connections can be formed and can happen. And these are all just different types of cross connections that you may see, but you may not think about. Hose bib. First glance, a hose bib seems pretty innocent, but it's the things people do with that can cause a problem. Filling a swimming pool, filling a backpack sprayer with chemicals. I guess they're back playing soccer. A lot of times they'll take that hose, stick it in the backpack sprayer, and they've got Roundup, asthma, whatever in that container. Once you put it in there, you've created a possible cross connection or backflow situation. What if you call out the Roto-Rooter man? He takes your hose and he puts a spray nozzle on the end of it, cleans out your sewer line. He runs your hose up in there. Possibility something could have got drawn back up in there. I'm getting rid of the hose. I don't know about you. But you know, think about what people do with the hose bib. It's the easiest way to get to water, but there's a lot of things that can happen from it, so just be cautious what you do. And nowadays, most new construction, probably in the last 15, 20 years, most new construction requires a hose bib vacuum breaker on a spigot, outdoor spigot. And boy, I'll tell you what, people hated those things. I mean, there are people sawing them off, heating them off, torching them off because I ain't gonna put that dang thing on my house. But it was there for a reason. If you ever watch one work, when you turn the water off and water comes to rush back, it belches it out right there at that hose bib vacuum breaker. And it doing what it's designed to do, keep water back in that line. Because on the other side of that hose bib is the same water that's in your house, that you drink, that you bathe in, that you wash dishes in. So if you've been washing your car or something and you know you've got it in a bucket of suds or whatever and it sucks it back in, it's in the house. So that hose bib vacuum breaker keeps it from getting back in there. So it's not a bad thing as what we first thought it was. They talk about lawn sprinklers as a cross connection. On a large number of lawn sprinkler installations, the sprinkler heads are below ground level. Water which may have been in contact with fertilizer and weed killers can be siphoned through the leaky valve into the potable water supply. Irrigation piping systems. In many farms, water is pumped from irrigation water channels into sprinkler systems. A large number of these installations are also connected to the domestic water supply. So there's a cross connection between drinking water and pond water. So just, you know, be aware of that. Fire sprinkler systems in a lot of industrial situations, warehouses, they have overhead sprinkler systems in them. Fire suppression systems is what they're called. Well, in order to keep from losing everything that's in a warehouse or whatnot, or apartment complex, the fire department can put fire suppression chemicals in those systems. The water a lot of times stands, they don't filter it, they don't, you know, it can get kind of nasty. So they'll sometimes put chemicals in there as well to help fight the fire if a fire does break out, and then to kind of maintain it. So that water is definitely not good, but right there on the outside of a lot of those high-rise buildings or a lot of those industrial buildings is a connection where somebody could actually connect if they didn't know what they were doing. Or if they didn't care. But that wetting agent that they put in there is definitely not something that we want back in the city main. And when the fire department hooks up to a fire hydrant, they are right there on top of the city main. So for whatever reason, if something went haywire, they could pump all that back into the drinking water. All right, let's look at the next page. Backflow prevention devices. This gives some definitions. Now, the examples we talked about, they're not going to be on there. Now, this page is pretty important because it gives multiple questions based on the device, based on backflow. Backflow, a lot of what you'll see is you'll see the description of the device, and then they'll give you the list of all the different devices, and you got to pick the right device that goes along with the description. First paragraph on the left says there are several different types of mechanical backflow prevention devices. Okay, most of the ones we'll talk about are mechanical. The other one is a physical separation or an air gap. Okay, so those, know the difference between the mechanical and then the physical separation. There's only one that's considered a physical separation, and that's the air gap, that's the sink. That's what that is. We'll talk about it in just a minute. Based on, the second paragraph, based on the degree of hazard of the fluid or the substance that may backflow into the supply piping system, the degree of hazard may be listed as toxic or non-toxic. And then it says, and could create a non-health or health hazard. Okay, so know that there are two different degrees of hazard, toxic, non-toxic, as the word toxic suggests. Toxic is bad, non-toxic not so much. The next paragraph describes the non-toxic. It says a non-health, which is also known as the non-toxic hazard, cross-connection is any point on the water supply system where a pollutant substance may come in contact with potable water, aesthetically affecting the taste, odor, or appearance of the water, but not hazardous to your health. Okay, so non-health or non-toxic, gonna smell funny, gonna look funny, maybe even taste funny. May make you spit it out, but it's not gonna affect your health. Salt water from the tanker. You get a drink of salt water, you're probably gonna spit it out. It's not something you're gonna drink. On the other hand, in California back in the early 70s, there was an instance where one of the wineries, talks about the submerged inlet the vats, stopping the grapes, that kind of thing. One of their presses had a bad valve. They didn't have backflow. Well, that press caused Chardonnay or something to be pushed back into the drinking water supply. People were getting water that was diluted with this Chardonnay. Kind of came out a little pink, kind of tasted a little sweet. It wasn't something that was going to kill you, but you could tell there was something wrong with it. You could tell the taste. You might even could smell it a little bit. But it wasn't something that was going to be toxic. It was a non-toxic situation. Still, something in the water that didn't need to be there. The next definition, the next paragraph says the health hazard, the toxic cross-connection is any point on a water supply system where a contaminant substance may come in contact with potable water supply, creating an actual health hazard, causing sickness or death. Amoebic dysentery. Said 85 people died or whatever, 1,400 and something of them sick, many more. That's an issue of a toxic. Arsenic compound in a hose from a hose-in sprayer. That's a toxic, okay? Non-toxic, looks bad, tastes bad, appears bad, not gonna kill you. You'll notice it, a hazard, a high hazard or health hazard is a toxic, creating sickness and or death, okay? So know the differences. Right there. Those are definite test questions. And look like probably about 5 or 6 right on that one paragraph. Okay. It talks about the different devices, the middle paragraph there at the top. It gives you the name of the device. One of the devices, and I'm gonna bring one on next week, and we'll look at it, is a reduced pressure principal assembly. RP, reduced pressure. It is the best device. If you're in doubt, if you've got a toxic or if you've got a back pressure, back siphonage, whatever, it'd be the way to go, but they're expensive. A lot of people stay away from them. There are some instances they're mandatory. The dentist office, downtown Bullard, because there is medical waste, not waste, but just, people, getting their teeth fixed or whatever, blood, saliva, whatever. There is a potential there for a health hazard. A medical facility like that has to have an RP, reduced pressure device. A lot of restaurants have to have them. Hospitals have to have them. Listen to the description of it, and maybe it'll help you understand why. It's commonly referred to as an RP. This device consists of 2 independently acting check valves together with an automatically operating pressure differential relief valve located between the two check valves. I'll show it to you, it might make a little more sense, but that is the description of an RP. Know that description. Because what you will see is you'll see that description and then they'll list RP, double check. You know, they'll list all the devices and you'll have to pick which one it is. So that's a test question. It says down at the very bottom of it, it says, kind of the last sentence there, it says, the unit has two resiliently seated shutoff valves, one upstream and one downstream of the checks, and properly located test cocks for field testing. Okay? The one thing that makes this different than any other device, it says there at the top, it says it has a pressure differential relief valve. The way this device works, it has two check valves. You've got water coming in, it goes through a check. Okay? Normally, check probably gonna be good, it's gonna suffice, but in case it fails, then it's got a second one. But in between those two is a dump. Differential pressure relief valve. If this valve recognizes a difference in pressure from inlet to outlet, let's say you have 85 pounds coming in, and then all of a sudden, you lose some going through it, and you typically running about 82. Well, all of a sudden, there's a pump that malfunctions, and it's putting 90 pounds. The differential pressure relief valve recognizes the difference in 85 and 90 and opens and allows water to dump out and spill out. It is the best device because it has a way to void the system of any contaminant. That differential pressure relief valve opens the atmosphere and allows any contaminant to dump out on the lawn or out in the grass. And that's why it is the best device, because it's not giving it a chance to get back into it. It's not giving it a chance to get past that first check valve. It's getting it out. None of the other devices have that type of technology. Pressure vacuum breaker. And here again, I'll give you the description. The description will show up as a question. You'll have to pick the right device. The pressure vacuum breaker, PVB, is a device that contains within a single body a single loaded check valve and a loaded air opening valve, which opens to admit air whenever the pressure within the body of the device approaches atmospheric. Okay, it's a device based on the way it's set up and the way it's installed, that it's a single check valve. Water comes from the bottom, comes in, goes over the top, and then down and out to the system. So it's got a check valve. It's spring loaded. So as the water comes in, it pushes this valve up and collapses the spring on top, and water just goes by. Well, when pressure quits, the pressure drops because it's making this up and over move. And when there's a break in the action, so to speak, and water stops flowing, that check valve with the spring pushes the valve down and closes it off. Now, if for some reason it pushes down and closes it off and there's still water that tries to come back, it has a little spot where it can push it to atmosphere from the top. But it's a single valve, and it doesn't recognize difference in pressure. All it recognizes is that spring shut it, and it's got to go somewhere. So it's not as good a device. It is a good device, but it is not as good a device as the RP. But it has certain instances where it will work as well. So the description, remember it, because you're going to have to match up the RP or PVB or whatever with the right description. Don't need to, you put an X through that dual check, don't need to know anything about it. It's not for us. The atmospheric vacuum breaker, there on the right-hand column. And the dual check down at the bottom. There's two. There's a dual check with atmospheric port, and then there's a dual check. We don't need to know anything about either one of those. Just mark them off. The atmospheric vacuum breaker on the right side, that second paragraph in, AVB is what it's abbreviated. The whole little paragraph there, it says an atmospheric vacuum breaker has a moving element inside which During flow, prevents water from spilling from the device, and during cessation of flow, drops down to provide a vent opening. The device should not remain under pressure for long durations, and it cannot have any shut-off valves downstream. Hopefully they'll make a little bit, when I show these to you, they'll make a little better sense. But it is similar to a pressure vacuum breaker. Pressure vacuum breaker is spring-loaded. Atmospheric vacuum breaker just has a moving element. The water comes up, it pushes that element, seals off the top, and it goes and does its thing. When there's a break in the action, and it recognizes that water has stopped flowing, that disc drops. It just drops. It doesn't have a spring. Atmospheric pressure just causes it to drop. That's not the best form of closure that I've ever seen. But if everything's moving right, there's no debris, it will do what it's supposed to do. And if it drops, it will force any water coming back out through the top, just like the pressure vacuum breaker. Pressure vacuum breaker, spring-loaded check valve. This is just a floating disc. And so, atmospheric vacuum breaker is old technology. It worked great for a while, but it is somewhat limited just because of what it is good for. It's not really good for a whole lot anyway. But keep that one in mind. Okay, I missed one. Down at the bottom of the very first column, the double check. I don't know how I missed it, but the description of it says a double check valve assembly, the DC, as it's abbreviated, is composed of two single independently acting check valves. The unit has two tightly closing resistant seated shutoff valves located at each end of the device, and 4 test cocks for testing of the check valves. That's the one that most of us will use as the double check for most sprinklers. It is a relatively safe device, good device. It doesn't have any way to get rid of contaminated water, so it has to be inspected on a regular basis. Make sure that it's working properly. Be aware the definition, the description, and when you see the two, Tuesday when I bring them, they're very similar. The double check says that it has 2 spring-loaded check valves, 2 residually seated shutoff valves, 4 test cocks. The RP, the description starts 2 independently acting check valves, but it says with a pressure differential relief valve in between the two. That's going to be the difference. If you just look at the definition real quick or the description of it real quick, you could very